Nora Callahan had been on her feet for 11 hours. That was the first thing she thought about as she pushed through the back door of Kellerman's diner, the cold November air hitting her face like a slap she almost welcomed. 11 hours of overcooked eggs of coffee, refills for men who never said thank you, of smiling through a lower back that had stopped cooperating somewhere around the third hour. Her uniform smelled like bacon grease and dish soap. Her sneakers had a hole forming at the left toe. She had $347 in her checking account and a rent notice she had folded into her apron pocket so she would not have to look at it. She thought about Ren, 7 years old, home alone, brave in the way that children become brave when they have no other choice. Nora had left the television on, had checked the lock twice, had told her daughter that she would be home before midnight. It was 11:47. She needed to move. The main road would have taken her to the subway in 8 minutes, but the subway platform on Atlantic Avenue was being repaired, and that added another 12. The shortcut through Crane Street cut the whole journey in half. She had taken it every night for 2 years. She knew where the broken streetlight was, knew which dumpster sat at the corner, knew the rhythm of that particular alley, the way a person learns the geography of their own survival. She turned onto Crane Street. The night was quiet in the way that cities pretend to be quiet, still humming underneath pipes and distant traffic and the faint music from someone's window 2 floors up. Nora walked fast, bag pulled tight against her ribs, breath making small clouds in the cold. She heard the boy before she saw him. It was not a scream. It was something worse than a scream. It was the voice of a child who had already been screaming and had run out of strength for it, dropped down to a ragged, desperate whisper that somehow carried further than shouting would have. "Please, my dad will give you anything. Please." Nora stopped. Every instinct she possessed, every reasonable voice inside her head told her to keep walking. She had a daughter at home. She had $347. She was a woman alone in an alley at midnight, and whatever was happening in the dark ahead of her was not her business and not her fight and not something she was equipped to survive. She stood there for exactly 2 seconds. Then she picked up the broken beer bottle near the dumpster and she ran toward the sound. 3 men in dark clothing and ski masks had a boy pinned against a black van. The boy was maybe 9 years old, small for his age, wearing a coat that probably cost more than Nora made in a week. One man had him in a chokehold. Another was hauling open the van's sliding door. The third stood watch at the far end of the alley, and it was this third man who turned first when Nora came around the corner. She did not stop to think about what she was doing. She hurled the bottle. It connected with the side of the van with a crack that rang off the brick walls, and in the half-second of surprise that followed, the boy twisted his head and bit down hard on the arm holding him. The man swore and let go, and the boy ran. He did not run toward the end of the alley. He did not run toward the street or the light or any of the logical directions a frightened child might choose. He ran straight to Nora and crashed into her with his whole weight, arms going around her waist, face buried against her shoulder body, shaking so violently she could feel it in her own chest. "Don't let them take me. Please, please don't let them. I've got you," she said. She did not know how she was going to back that up, but she said it like she meant it, which was the only thing she had. The 3 men had recovered. The one the boy had bitten was flexing his hand with murder in his eyes. The tallest one cracked his knuckles and started walking toward her with the slow, deliberate confidence of a man who had never been surprised twice in one night. And then the alley flooded with light. 2 black SUVs screamed to a halt at both ends of Crane Street doors, flying open before they had fully stopped. Men in dark suits poured out, moving with a precision that was not the precision of police or security guards, but something older and more absolute. They did not announce themselves. They did not draw weapons dramatically. They simply arrived, and the weight of their arrival changed the air. The man who stepped out of the lead vehicle last was not the largest man in the alley. He was not carrying a visible weapon, but every single person present, including the 3 men in ski masks, looked at him first. That was the thing about Stellenver. You could put him in a room full of dangerous people, and the room would reorganize itself around him without being told to. He was tall, dark-haired, somewhere in his early 40s, with a jaw that looked like it had been placed there by someone who took that kind of thing seriously. His suit was black, and it fit the way expensive things fit, like it had been made specifically for this body and no other. His eyes swept the alley in one pass and landed on the boy still pressed against Nora's side. Something happened to his face. It was not softness exactly. Stellenver did not do softness, but something behind the control shifted just for a moment, like a door opening into a room with a fire in it, and Nora saw it before the mask came back down. Nico. His voice was rough and quiet, and it carried everything. The boy lifted his head. Papa. He started to pull away from Nora, and then stopped, turning back, grabbing her hand with both of his. She saved me, Papa. She saved me. They were going to put me in the van. Stellan's gaze moved from his son to Nora. She had not let go of the boy. The boy had not let go of her. Between them was something that had formed in approximately 90 seconds and already felt structural. The three kidnappers had been backed against the wall by Stellan's men. None of them were speaking now. The tallest one, the one who had been walking toward Nora with such confidence, was watching Stellan the way a man watches something he has made a very serious mistake around. Stellan walked toward them slowly. He said something in a voice too low for Nora to hear clearly. Whatever it was made the tallest man's face go the color of old concrete. Then Stellan turned back, and his eyes were on Nora again, steady and measuring, and she had the distinct impression she was being assessed the way a locked door to a mower assesses a key. The tallest kidnapper turned to go, and then almost as an afterthought glanced back at Nora. Not at Stellan, at her. You weren't supposed to be here tonight, sweetheart. Then they ran. It was not what you would say to a random stranger who had interrupted a kidnapping. It was not what you said to someone who had stumbled into the wrong place at the wrong time. It was the kind of sentence that only made sense if you knew where she was supposed to be. Stellan had heard it. She could tell by the way his attention sharpened without visibly moving. What is your name? It was not a question. The grammar of it was a statement, a claim. Nora Callahan. He said it back to her without inflection, the way you repeat something you intend to remember. Do you know those men? Number. Do you know who sent them? Number. She held his gaze and did not flinch because there was nothing in her to flinch with. She was running on adrenaline and 11 hours of dishwater and the specific exhaustion of a woman who had been holding everything together by herself for so long that she had forgotten what it felt like to put anything down. Nico was still holding her hand. Papa, she did not run. Everyone else was afraid, but she did not run. Something passed across Stellenber's face too quickly to name. He spoke to the nearest man without looking away from Nora. Marcus. Find out where she lives. Full background. Everything she has ever touched. Nora's jaw tightened. I did not do anything wrong. No, his voice changed slightly. The edge went out of it, not into warmth, but into something more careful. You did something very right. But people who cross paths with my son do not simply walk away from it. Not anymore. He looked at Nico. The boy had his face tilted up, watching his father with an expression Nora could not entirely read, equal parts trust and worry, the face of a child who loves someone he was also afraid for. Papa, can Miss Nora come with us, please? Stellan's jaw moved. His eyes went back to Nora, and she could see him calculating something, not threat assessment, something else. You have someone at home. My daughter. She's 7. She's alone. He nodded once to a man on his left. Go to her building. Bring the girl here. Make sure she is not frightened. Nora started. You cannot just... It is not a request, Miss Callahan. He turned toward the lead SUV. It is the safest option available to you tonight. Someone saw your face in this alley. That means you are no longer anonymous. And in my world, the anonymous are the only ones who are safe. He opened the door. If you are innocent, he said without looking back, and I mean entirely, completely, irreparably innocent, then tomorrow you go home. And this was simply a strange night. If you are not, then we will have a different conversation. He got in. The door closed. Nora stood in the alley holding the hand of a 9-year-old boy she had met 6 minutes ago, surrounded by men in suits she did not know, and understood clearly that her old life had just ended. The mansion sat behind 12-foot stone walls in Staten Island, set back from a road lined with maples that had gone bare for winter. Iron gates, security cameras on every corner, a long driveway that curved through grounds Nora could not fully see in the dark. Inside was marble and dark wood and silence of the particular kind that money buys. Not peaceful silence, controlled silence. The silence of a place that had learned to contain whatever happened inside it. Nora stood in the entrance hall with Nico still close at her side and felt the full weight of the distance between this world and the one she had come from. The chandelier overhead cost more than she would earn in 5 years. The painting on the wall was the kind you saw in museums. A man materialized from a side hallway. Late 50s silver hair, a suit that fit like armor. He looked at Nora the way customs officers look at passengers they have already decided are suspicious. Sal Greco introduced himself as Stellan's advisor. He did not offer his hand. He walked a slow half circle around Nora, and she led him, keeping her expression neutral, her hand still her chin level. "She's clean," one of the other men said from a doorway. "No wire, no phone recording." Sal's expression did not change. "Today she is clean." He looked at Nico. The boy was still close to Nora, not quite touching her now, but oriented toward her the way a compass orients toward north. That alone seemed to irritate Sal. "She is no one," he said to Stellan, who had appeared at the top of the staircase and was descending without hurry. "A waitress who works in a diner that sits in the middle of the territory overlap between us and Ashford's people. That is not coincidence. That is geography with intent." Stellan reached the bottom of the stairs. His eyes went to Nico first, checking him the way a father does, cataloging the physical evidence of what his son had been through that night. Then he looked at Nora. "I serve breakfast and lunch to half of Brooklyn," Nora said. "I do not know who my customers work for." Sal's mouth curved without becoming a smile. "Of course not." "Sal," Stellan's voice was quiet. "Enough," he gestured toward the study. "We will discuss it." He looked at Nora over his shoulder. "Someone will show you a room. Stay in the house." He walked away. Nico looked up at Nora with the calm solemnity of a child who has been frightened all the way through and come out the other side of it. "Can I show you my room?" It was such an ordinary sentence in such an extraordinary night that Nora almost laughed. "Sure," she said. "Lead the way." Nico's room was at the end of the second floor overlooking the dark grounds and the tree line beyond. It had the appearance of a room that was carefully maintained but rarely played in. Expensive toys arranged neatly along shelves. Books alphabetized. A desk with pencils sorted by length. And on the wall beside the window a corkboard covered in drawings. He went to it immediately the way he had gone to her in the alley directly and without apology. He pulled a large sketchbook from the desk drawer and brought it to the window seat, sitting cross-legged, waiting for her to sit beside him. Nora sat. He opened the book to the first page. A man and a boy, both stick figures, but with more detail than that phrase implied. The man was tall, wide-shouldered, a shadow of shading across his jaw. The boy was smaller, holding the man's hand with both of his turned slightly toward him. It was unmistakably Stellan and Nico, rendered with the particular accuracy of a child who had studied his subject for a long time. The second drawing stopped Nora. A woman in a yellow dress. She was smiling, the smile careful and large and clearly drawn by someone who wanted to capture happiness, but had caught something more complicated instead. The woman's arm was extended, reaching towards something outside the frame of the drawing. Her hand was open. She was not holding anything. "My mama," Nico said. "She smiled a lot. Papa said she smiled even when she was sad." He paused. "How do you tell a real smile from a pretend one?" Nora looked at the drawing for a moment. She did not have a clean answer. She had spent years showing Ren a face that said everything was fine when everything was not fine, and she did not know if that was love or deception or both. "I think," she said carefully, "sometimes you cannot tell in the moment. You can only tell later, when you look back." Nico considered this with the seriousness of someone for whom the question was not theoretical. He turned to the third drawing. This one was darker in tone, the pencil pressed harder into the paper. Stellan stood at the center of a circle of other figures, all of them facing inward, some with shapes that suggested weapons. Stellan was not drawn with fear. He was drawn with isolation. Lone inside a ring of loyalty or threat, it was impossible to determine which. "Papa pretends he is not scared," Nico said. "But I hear him at night. He checks my room. He stands at the door and listens to make sure I am still breathing. He thinks the bad men will come back." He closed the sketchbook. "Do you think they will?" Nora looked at this boy, 9 years old, carrying questions that no 9-year-old should be required to carry, and she said what she believed to be true. "Your father is not going to let that happen, and neither will I." The words came out with more certainty than she felt and less certainty than she meant. Somewhere between those two things was the version she hoped was true. Nico looked at her for a long time with eyes that were older than his face. Then he nodded and she understood that he was choosing to believe her, which was not the same as being convinced, but was still a significant thing. Ren arrived 40 minutes later. Nora heard the cars first, then voices, then her daughter's particular way of moving, quick and light and slightly louder than the situation required. Ren came through the front door holding the hand of a woman in professional clothes who had clearly been chosen for her non-threatening appearance, looking around the entrance hall with the uncomplicated wonder of a 7-year-old encountering a chandelier for the first time. Mom! Her face lit up when she saw Nora. She came at a run. Are we staying in a castle? Something close to a castle. Ren looked around with uncontained fascination. Then she noticed Nico standing at the top of the staircase watching through the railing with cautious eyes. She looked at him. He looked at her. I'm Ren, she said. What's your name? Nico. This is my house. It's a really cool house. Can you show me? He hesitated for only a moment. Then he came down the stairs and the two children walked off together discussing something about video games at a volume that would have seemed impossible 20 minutes ago, and Nora stood in the marble entrance hall and breathed. Stellan appeared at the edge of the room. He had changed his jacket but otherwise looked identical, controlled and watchful and slightly separate from the room he occupied. He watched the children disappear up the staircase. He laughs, Stellan said more to himself than to her. Something faint moved through his voice. I forgot what that sounded like. Nora said nothing. There was nothing that needed adding. She woke early in a guest room larger than her entire apartment in sheets that felt like a different category of fabric than she had previously encountered. For 3 seconds, she did not remember where she was. Then she remembered everything. She found her way downstairs before 7, following the smell of coffee, and was standing in the kitchen doorway when she heard heels on marble. Vivienne Locke was in her mid-30s and wore her appearance the way some women wear credentials as evidence of worth and effort. She was beautiful in the precise and deliberate way that requires significant maintenance. She wore a dress that would have been notable at a dinner party and was striking at 7 in the morning in a stranger's kitchen. She stopped when she saw Nora. Her eyes moved from Nora's borrowed clothes, slightly too large and clearly not her own, to the coffee cup in her hand, to the small name tag still pinned to the folded uniform hanging over the kitchen chair from the night before. A calculation happened behind her eyes. He always picks up strays when he is lonely, she said. Her voice was pleasant and clean and cold as tap water. Do not mistake it for something real. Nora looked at her without particular urgency. Vivienne moved further into the kitchen. He has done this before. A woman in trouble, usually with a child involved. He responds to it. She poured herself coffee with the confidence of someone who had done it in this kitchen many times. He will feel responsible for you for approximately 2 weeks, and then the situation will resolve and you will go back to whatever you came from. Nora set her cup down. Did he ask you to come here this morning? Number. Then I am not sure this conversation is necessary. Vivienne's chin lifted slightly. I am trying to help you. No, said Nora. You are trying to help yourself. Those are different things, but thank you for the coffee. Vivienne stared at her for a moment with the expression of someone encountering unexpected resistance from a source they had not rated as significant. Then she reached for her phone. The movement was small, almost reflexive of a check before she left the room. Her thumb moved twice on the screen before she put it away. Nora filed it away without showing that she had. Stellan appeared in the kitchen doorway shortly after. He looked at Vivienne and something in his face flattened. Get out, Vivienne. She left. Her heels on the marble were precise and controlled and said everything that her face had not. Stellan watched her go. Then he looked at Nora and the flatness remained, but she could read behind it now, just slightly. Come to the study at 9. We need to talk. The study was floor-to-ceiling books, a desk that suggested significant work happened at it, 2 chairs positioned across from each other at a distance that was not comfortable but was not hostile. Sal stood by the window. Stellan sat behind the desk. Nora sat across from him and put her hands in her lap and waited. Sal placed a file folder on the desk. In the past 4 weeks, Stellan said, opening the folder without looking at it, 3 men have sat in your section at Kellerman's diner on 3 separate occasions. He turned the folder toward her. Photographs. Men in suits unremarkable at a diner, apparently just customers. These men work for Gerald Ashford. Nora looked at the photographs. She looked at them carefully because she believed that accuracy mattered here, and she wanted to be accurate. I serve 100 people a day, she said. More on weekends. These 3 appeared within a 4-week window, Sal said from the window. The same 4-week window during which Ashford finalized his plan to take Nico. He let that settle. It would be useful for us to understand whether their presence in your section was coincidence or coordination. The word coordination sat in the room like something heavy. Nora looked at Stellan directly. I pour coffee. I take orders. I carry plates. I smile and I collect tips and I go home to my daughter. I have $347 in my checking account and a hole in my left shoe. You think someone like me is sophisticated enough to be part of whatever you are describing? Stellan's eyes did not waver. I think he said slowly that people who are useful to men like Ashford rarely look sophisticated. That is the point. Nora was quiet for a moment. Then she said, your son held my hand for 6 hours last night. He showed me his sketchbook. He told me his mother left. He asked me how to tell a real smile from a pretend one. She leaned forward slightly. If I am working for your enemy, I am the worst asset he has ever recruited. Because I am sitting here telling you exactly where I stand, and I am not afraid of you, and I am not performing innocence. This is just what innocent looks like. The room was quiet. From outside the door came the sound of Nico's voice, light and clear, asking Ren something about what she wanted for breakfast. Ren answering with her characteristic list of requirements. The ordinary sound of children negotiating a morning. Stellan held Nora's gaze for a long time. Then he closed the folder. We will verify everything he said. Every detail of your life, every person you have spoken to, every shift you have worked. He stood. If it confirms what you have said, then you are under my protection and no one will touch you or your daughter. And if it does not confirm it, his eyes were steady, then we will have a different conversation. He walked to the door and paused without turning around. Your daughter likes it here. He said it as an observation with no editorial attached. Nora looked at the closed folder on the desk. Most children do, she said, before they understand what here costs. He left. Sal remained by the window for a moment, watching Nora with the particular attention of a man whose job it was to anticipate problems before they became visible. For what it is worth, he said, I do not believe you. Not yet, but I believe he does. He said it as a warning disguised as information. And in this house, that is the only thing that matters. He left too. Nora sat alone in the study. Through the window, she could hear the children in the garden. Nico pointing at something in the sky. Ren explaining something at length and with great authority. The sound of two children who had found each other and decided that was sufficient. She thought about the man in the alley. You were not supposed to be here tonight. She thought about the photographs. 3 men in 4 weeks sitting in her section, ordering coffee, leaving tips, watching. She thought about the sketchbook. The woman in the yellow dress with the reaching hand and the careful smile and the arm extended towards something that was not there. She thought about Nico asking how you tell a real smile from a pretend one. She did not have the answer yet, but she understood now that the question was not only about his mother. It was about everyone who had ever stood in the proximity of Stellan Vare and decided whether to stay or to leave, whether to protect or to sell, whether the thing being offered was worth what it actually cost. Nora Callahan had $347 and a hole in her left shoe and a daughter who deserved more than surviving. She had walked into an alley because a child was screaming, and she had stayed because she did not know how to walk away from something that was not finished. She did not know yet what finishing it would require, but she was beginning to understand that the answer to that question was going to cost something, and that it was going to cost it from her specifically, and that there was probably no version of this where she came out the other side, the same person she had been at 1147 on Crane Street with a beer bottle in her hand and no idea what she was walking toward. She picked up her coffee cup and went to find her daughter. The second day in the mansion felt different from the first. The first day had this quality of emergency, of adrenaline and immediate threat, and the particular alertness that comes from not knowing where the danger is coming from. The second day had something worse. The second day had the texture of waiting. Nora learned the house the way she had learned the alley on Crane Street, by moving through it until it stopped feeling foreign. The East Wing was where Stellan worked, the sound of low voices and closing doors a constant presence. The kitchen ran on a schedule she had not been given, but quickly understood. Nico was up by 7, fed by 7:30 in the room they had designated for schoolwork by 8. Ren followed Nico's rhythm with the adaptability of a child who had grown up adjusting to the shape of whatever room she was in. Sal moved through the house differently than Stellan did. Where Stellan occupied space with authority, Sal occupied it with surveillance. He was present in every corridor at the right moment, never rushing, never appearing to watch, but recording everything his eyes touched. He had not spoken directly to Nora since the study, but she felt his attention the way you feel a camera in a room where you cannot find the lens. Stellan she saw at breakfast and not again until evening. He sat across from his son and her daughter at a table that was built for 12 and currently held 4, and he ate without reading anything or taking calls, which she suspected was unusual, and he asked Nico questions about what the boy had read and what he had drawn, and whether his shoulder still hurt from the night before. He asked Wren her opinion on scrambled eggs versus fried with the solemnity of someone consulting an expert, and Wren gave him a three-point answer that made Nico laugh again. That sound that was apparently rare in this house, and Stellan's expression did the thing it had done in the alley, the brief opening, the quick closing. He did not ask Nora many questions. He watched her with the measuring attention of a man who had survived a long time by reading people correctly. She did not resent being read. After breakfast, he stood and said only, "We are still verifying." Then he was gone. Sal appeared in the doorway the moment Stellan left it. "You should know," he said, "that this is not normal." He looked at the table, at the plates, at the specific geometry of where everyone had been sitting. He does not eat with people. He does not ask children about their opinions on eggs. Nora began stacking plates. "You are saying this to unsettle me." "I am saying this because it is true. And because, in my experience, the things Stellan does that are not normal tend to end badly for the person who caused the abnormality." Nora looked at him. "Are you trying to protect him or protect the house?" Sal was quiet for a moment. Those are the same thing. She did not think they were, but she let it go. The call from Colby came on the second afternoon. She almost did not answer. He had been calling for 3 days before she disappeared into the mansion calls she had been avoiding because they always meant the same thing. The particular frequency of her brother's voice when he needed money or rescue, or both, the way it made her feel guilty and tired simultaneously. She knew that was not charitable. She knew he was 23 and still becoming someone. But knowing things and feeling them were separate activities. She answered because something in the call's timing felt different. "Nora," he was whispering. His voice had a quality she had not heard in it before, something stripped of the usual performance of casualness he maintained to obscure how frightened he usually was. Just something real underneath. "Where are you?" she said. "Colby, where are you right now?" "Garfield's, the coffee place on Fulton. Can you come? I need to tell you something, and I need to tell you in person, and I need you not to bring anyone." She looked at the door. Sal would notice if she left. Stellan's men were positioned at every exit. She had not been told she was a prisoner, but she had not been told she was free either, and the distinction had remained usefully blurry. She told Nico she was going to get some air. She told the man in the kitchen hallway that she needed a pharmacy. Feminine products said it flatly in a way that produced immediate uncomfortable agreement in a car. She did not feel good about this. She did it anyway. Garfield's was 12 minutes from the gate. Colby was in the back corner booth, the one with the sight line to both the door and the window, which told her he had arrived frightened and was thinking about exits. He was 23 years old, and he looked 5 years younger and 5 years older than that simultaneously, the particular combination of immaturity and damage that Nora had been watching accumulate in him since their father died 6 years ago. He had been sleeping poorly. She could see it in the color under his eyes, in the way his hands did not rest on the table but moved against each other in slow, useless friction. She sat down. "Talk," she said. He looked at her, and she saw in his face the precise expression that preceded all the significant confessions he had made over the years. The night he totaled the car. The semester he failed out the money borrowed from their mother's account before she passed. The expression of someone who has been holding something and can no longer hold it and does not know what the release will cost them. "I owe money," he said. "How much?" $47,000. The number sat on the table between them. Nora had been expecting a number. She had not been expecting that number. She looked at her brother and felt something complex and exhausting move through her. Not quite anger and not quite grief, but the specific emotion that exists in the space between them. The one that visits you when someone you love does the same irreparable thing for the 4th time. She breathed. "Tell me the rest," she said. 4 days ago, Colby said a man came to see him. Came to the apartment, not called, came in person, which Colby should have recognized as significant, but did not, because the man was so unremarkable in appearance, so smooth and so pleasant, that everything about the visit felt ordinary even when it was not. The man said he had heard about Colby's situation, said he was in a position to help, offered to pay the debt in full, no interest, no repayment schedule, as a gesture of goodwill. In exchange, the man asked questions. The questions were casual, conversational. "Where does your sister work? What time does she get off? Does she always walk home the same way?" Colby had answered. He had been eating lunch the man bought him. The man had treated him like a person worth talking to. And Colby Callahan had not had enough of that in recent years to be cautious about the source. He had told the man that Nora always took Crane Street home. Always. Every night for 2 years because it cut the time in half and Ren was alone and every minute mattered. The debt was paid the following morning. Nora sat very still. She was aware of her own breathing. She was aware of the specific quality of the silence in the coffee shop around them. Other people's ordinary conversations, a man at the counter reading something on his phone, a woman with a stroller negotiating the door. All of it happening in a parallel world that did not know what she now knew. The man in the alley. You were not supposed to be here tonight. Not a warning. Not a coincidence. Someone had put her on Crane Street. Someone had made sure she would be there when the van pulled in, when the boy was taken, when everything was set in motion. She processed the why quickly. A waitress who worked the diner where Ashford's men gathered. Someone Nico would respond to in a crisis. Someone ordinary enough to appear accidental. Someone who once inside the mansion could be used in directions Ashford had already mapped. The man's name, she said. Did he give you a name? Gerald Colby said. Gerald something. He had a card, but I threw it out. She stood. Listen to me. She kept her voice even because losing it would not help anything, and she needed Colby functional. You are going to go directly back to your apartment. You are going to lock the door. You are not going to answer it for anyone you do not know. You are not going to call this Gerald back. Nora, his voice fractured slightly. What is happening? I do not know the full shape of it yet. She touched his arm briefly, the quick reassurance she had been giving him since he was 7 years old. But I am going to find out, and until I tell you otherwise, you stay put. Do you understand me? He nodded. He looked frightened in the way that she recognized as genuine, not performance, not the managed fear he used to avoid things, but real wide-open fear. She left him in the back booth of Garfield's and got back in the car and told the driver to return to the mansion, and during the 12-minute drive, she sat with what she knew and tried to understand what it meant. And by the time the iron gates opened, she had arrived at something that was not yet a conclusion, but was close enough to one to be dangerous. She walked into the house and found Sal in the entrance hall and said, I need to speak to Stellan. She did not wait for his opinion on this. She was already moving toward the study. Stellan was at his desk when she came in, papers in front of him, the lamp the only light. He looked up when she entered, and whatever he saw in her expression made him set down what he was holding. She told him everything. She told him about Colby and the debt and the man and the questions about Crane Street. She told him about the paid debt and the conversation and the man's first name. She told him about the timing, 4 weeks of Ashford's men in her section, the questions about her route home, the deliberate positioning of her in that specific alley at that specific hour. She told him because she had promised honesty and because Sal's words had settled into the correct place in her understanding. In this house, that is the only thing that matters. When she finished, Stellan said, your brother did not know what he was providing. Number, but he provided it. Yes, he was quiet. This does not change what I told Sal to look for, but it changes the shape of what Ashford was building. He wanted you in that alley, Stellan said slowly. He knew my men would bring you here. He knew Nico would respond to you. Why? Because you are useful in a way that a gun is not. His eyes came back to her. You are someone Nico trusts. That is leverage against me. I did not choose to be leverage, Nora said. I know. He said it without blame. Ashford chose it for you. That is what men like him do. They make decisions about other people's lives, and the people do not find out until the decision is already made. He stood. Your brother stays here. Effective immediately. Nora started. That is not your decision. He looked at her steadily. Ashford has already used Colby once. He will use him again. Your brother is the softest target in your life, Miss Callahan. He is an open door in a house I am trying to secure. She heard the logic and hated it and could not find the flaw in it. Fine, she said. Before she could go, Sal appeared at the door. His expression was different from any she had seen on him before. Not the surveillance face or the skeptical face. Something stripped back. He held a small evidence bag. We found this behind the bookshelf in the sitting room. The one near the window where you sit with Nico in the evenings. A listening device. Small, flat, professional. It is not from us, Sal said. Stellan said, who has had access to that room in the past 2 weeks? Sal said, staff. Our own men. He paused. And Vivian. She was here 4 days ago. She used that sitting room to wait while you finished a call. He paused again. The security log shows she also passed through the laundry corridor on the same visit. The corridor where the rear exit alarm was found disabled this morning during a routine check. 1 trip. 2 objectives. She disabled the exit on the same visit she planted the device. The name Vivian landed in the room the way a stone lands in still water, the ripple moving outward from the center in every direction at once. Stellan's face did not change. This was not the quality of no change that comes from not feeling anything. This was the controlled stillness of a man absorbing information that rearranges the interior of something he built, something he trusted, something that was supposed to be separate from the rest of it. "Find her," he said. Sal left. Nora stood in the study and looked at Stellan and saw for the first time the thing underneath both the mask and the opening she had caught in unguarded moments. A man who had built a structure around himself specifically because the people inside it kept finding ways to damage it from within. She did not say anything. There was nothing useful to say. He turned toward the window. She understood this as dismissal and had reached the door when he spoke without turning. "My son showed you his sketchbook," he said. "The drawings." "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. "He has never shown anyone those drawings. Not me, not the nannies, not anyone who has worked here. He said it to the window. He showed you after 40 minutes. She waited. "That either means you are very dangerous," he said, "or very necessary. I am still determining which." She left him standing at the window with whatever that determination was going to cost him. That night she could not sleep. She lay in the guest room and listened to the sounds of the house settling around her and thought about Ashford's coordination and Vivian's listening device, and Colby answering casual questions over a lunch he was grateful for, and she tried to find the shape of what was being built around her. She heard footsteps in the corridor. Slow, deliberate, the particular pace of someone who is not going anywhere specific but cannot be still. She had heard this sound once before the previous night, circling past certain doors. Checking on Nico. She lay still and listened to the footsteps pass and return, and finally stop outside a specific door and remain there for a long moment before moving on. And she thought about a man who had built an empire of power and control and could not sleep because he was afraid of losing the one thing in it that he had not been able to armor. The footsteps came past her door and stopped briefly. A pause, then they continued. She closed her eyes. She did not sleep for a long time. In the morning, she found Nico at the kitchen table before anyone else was up, sketchbook, open pencil moving. He looked up when she came in and slid the book slightly toward her an invitation. She sat beside him and looked at what he was drawing. It was a new page, 4 figures this time. The tall man, the boy, and 2 new people added with careful attention, a woman with kind eyes and a smaller figure beside her holding the woman's hand. He had added her and Ren. He had put them inside the family. He had done it in the night or early this morning quietly and without being asked, and the figures were drawn with the same attention he gave to everything that mattered to him. Above the 4 figures in his careful, deliberate handwriting, he had written the words, "My new family. Please don't leave like Mama did." The pencil kept moving. She put her cup down. The thing about a promise is that it exists whether or not you say it out loud. It exists the moment you understand what the other person is asking and feel the answer form in you, the response that precedes language, the one that is simply true before it is spoken. She looked at the 4 figures on the page. She thought about all the reasons to leave. She had 100 of them. She had Ashford and his coordination in a world she did not understand and did not want to understand. She had a daughter who deserved ordinary safety, ordinary mornings, a life that did not include listening devices and iron gates, and men who asked careful questions over lunches they paid for. She had 100 reasons to leave. She looked at the drawing. She stayed where she was. The 3rd day began with a phone call that Nora did not know she was waiting for until she heard it. She had been sitting on the window seat in the guest room, Ren's voice audible from somewhere down the hall. The sound of Nico explaining the rules of a card game with the patient authority of someone who had waited a long time for an audience that would listen. The morning light came through the glass at a low angle, the particular November light that never quite commits to being bright. The phone she had been given by one of Stellan's men, a plain device with a single contact saved in it, labeled with her brother's name, vibrated on the cushion beside her. "Colby." His voice when she answered had the quality it had at the coffee shop on Fulton, stripped of the performance, just the real thing underneath. "They called me," he said, from a number I did not recognize. A man's voice told me that what I did was noted, that my sister had made choices that were going to make my situation very uncomfortable. He paused. He said I should think about whether the people I was currently associated with were the kind who look after their own, or whether there was a better arrangement available. Nora was very still. "What did you say?" Colby was quiet for a moment. "I said that I was not interested in arrangements. Then I hung up and called you." She breathed. "Good," she said. "That was good." He said, I am not going to do it again. What I did before with the lunch and the questions. I need you to know that. His voice carried something she did not often hear in it, not apology exactly, which he had done too many times to give it much weight, but something more durable. Resolution, the kind that costs something to maintain. I know, she said. How do you know? Because you called me, she said. Not him. The line was quiet for a moment. Then he said, how is Ren? She is fine. She has found a co-conspirator. I think they are planning something with the card games. He made a sound that was close to a laugh. Tell her I said to fleece the rich kid thoroughly. She will not need the instruction. She comes by it naturally. After she hung up, she sat with the phone in her lap and thought about Ashford's men calling Colby with their careful, soft-voiced offers, thought about what it cost a 23-year-old who had been making poor decisions his whole life to hang up that call, and she felt something that was not quite pride but was in the same family, the recognition of a person doing the harder thing when the easier thing was available. She went to find Stellan. He was in the East Wing in the room that served as his primary office, the one she had not been inside before. When she knocked, he said, come in without looking up, which suggested he had been told she was in the corridor. She told him about the call. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said they are recalibrating. Ashford, his network. Ashford himself is not going to be in contact with anyone going forward. But he has people who know what he was building and will try to continue pieces of it independently. He looked up from the desk. Your brother is still a soft point. They know that. Colby hung up. I heard you. He held her eyes. This time. The call after that will be more sophisticated. And the one after that. She sat down in the chair across from his desk without being invited. Then what do you suggest? He considered her for a moment. He comes here. I have work that needs doing. Legitimate work, unglamorous. The kind that starts at the bottom because there is no other honest place to start. He held up a hand before she could speak. Not as a favor, not as charity. He earns it like anyone else. If he does not earn it, he loses it. If he earns it, he builds something that is his. She studied him. Why would you do that for someone you do not know? Stellan's expression shifted in the small ways she had come to recognize as significant. Because you trust him, he said. Not his judgment, but him. And your trust is not something I have found to be inaccurate. She looked at this man, this controlled and dangerous and carefully constructed person, and felt something that she did not have an immediate word for, the particular recognition that happens when you understand that someone has been paying attention to you in a way you did not know you were being paid attention to. She said, I will ask him. He looked back at his papers. That is all I am suggesting. She stood to go. He said without looking up, he called you first. Your brother. That matters. She did not turn around. I know, she said. She left him to his work and went back through the corridor, and the house held its careful quiet around her, the sounds of the children from somewhere above, the faint movement of the men at their stations, the particular architecture of a life that was not hers and was becoming hers simultaneously. The afternoon that Sal first showed something like uncertainty was 4 days after Nora's arrival. He came to find her in the sitting room where she had been reading to Nico and Ren from a book of illustrated myths that Nico had retrieved from the alphabetized shelves with the specific pride of someone sharing something they had been keeping to themselves. Ren was asleep against Nora's side with the total collapse of a child who has been resisting sleep for 40 minutes and finally lost. Nico was still awake, his sketchbook open on his knees, drawing something she could see was related to the myth they had just finished. Sal stood in the doorway for a moment without speaking. She looked up at him and waited. He said, we have confirmed your employment record. 2 years and 3 months at Kellerman's. No absences, unexplained. No contacts with any person connected to Ashford's network. He delivered this as information, not apology. Your financial records are consistent with what you described. Your prior employment the same. He paused. There is nothing. I told you there was nothing. I know. He said it without particular inflection. But telling and verifying are different. We verify. Nico looked up from his sketchbook, first at Sal and then at Nora. He had followed the exchange with the quiet attention of a child who has learned to monitor the emotional temperature of rooms. Does this mean Miss Nora is not a spy? Nico said. Sal looked at the boy. It means we have not found evidence that she is. Nico considered this. That is not the same as knowing she is good. Sal said no, it is not. Nico looked at Nora. I know she is good. He said it simply the way he said things that he had decided were simply true. She did not run in the alley. Sal looked at the boy for a moment with an expression Nora could not fully read. Then he said no, she did not. He looked at Nora one more time. The verification will continue, but the initial results are consistent with your account. He left. Nico went back to his drawing. Nora sat with Ren sleeping against her side and looked at the room around her. The expensive furniture and the quiet and the evidence of a life organized around protection and caution and the specific loneliness of people who have learned not to trust. And she thought about the man in the alley and the beer bottle and the 11-hour shift and the $347 and all the ordinary things that had placed her here in this room, in this house, with this boy who had decided she was good before anyone had verified anything. Sometimes she thought the verification was the thing that came second. Vivian Locke had been a constant at the mansion for 8 months before Nora arrived. This was the timeline Sal established once the investigation of the listening device opened into the investigation of everything else Vivian had touched while she was present in the house. 8 months of access, 8 months of being trusted in the way that people are trusted when they have been present long enough that their presence stops registering as something to examine. 8 months of knowing Stellan's schedule, his security rotations, his meetings, his preferences and patterns, and the specific geography of his life. She had provided all of it to Ashford, not all at once, not in any way that would have been obvious. The information came out in the investigation in small pieces that had to be assembled to reveal their full shape the way a picture is sometimes only visible from a distance. She had told Ashford about the Tuesday evenings when Stellan met with his financial people on the other side of the island. She had told him about the secondary vehicle that Nico sometimes traveled in. She had known about Crane Street because Nora had mentioned it once in the kitchen while Vivian was present, a casual remark about the fastest way home, the kind of thing you say without thinking because you have no reason to think it matters. It had mattered. When Sal laid all of this out for Stellan in the study with Nora present, because Stellan had said she should be, the room was very quiet. Stellan listened to the full account. He did not move during it. He did not react visibly in any way that could be described. When Sal finished, Stellan said, "How long before the federal transfer is complete?" Sal said, "It is already done. She is in custody as of this morning. The documentation we provided will hold." Stellan nodded once. "That is sufficient," he said. Sal looked at him for a moment, something passing between them that had the quality of a conversation that had happened before about what sufficient meant and where the line was. Then Sal nodded and gathered his papers and left. Nora sat across from Stellan in the study. She said, "Are you all right?" He looked at her for a moment, as though the question were in a language he was translating in real time. "I trusted her," he said, "not deeply, but enough to let her be present." She said, "That is not a character defect." He said, "In my world, it is a liability." She said, "In everyone's world, it is a liability. It is also how any human being lives with another human being for longer than an afternoon." She held his gaze. "You trusted Sal. You trust the men who work here. At some point, you trusted Helena, whatever happened after. The trust is not the error. What Vivian did with it is the error. Those are her actions, not a consequence of your judgment." He looked at her. She held his gaze without flinching, because there was nothing in her to flinch with on this particular point. He said, "You are very certain about things." She said, "I am certain about the things I have thought carefully about." She paused. "I have had a lot of time to think about trust, about what it costs to extend it and what it costs not to." He said, "What did you conclude?" She said that the cost of not extending it is higher. In the long run, it is just a slower cost and harder to attribute directly. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "My son draws you in his family." She said, "I know." He said, "He is not wrong about people. He has been wrong about many things. He is not wrong about people." She understood what this was, this careful, indirect, heavily qualified thing he was saying in the study with the lamp on, and Vivian's situation resolved, and 3 days still left of uncertainty before the pier. She said, "Neither am I." He held her eyes. Then he went back to his papers, and she understood that the conversation had concluded, and she left him to his work, and the house held them both in its careful structure, and it was enough. The night before the pier, she could not sleep again. This was different from the previous nights of sleeplessness, which had been the product of anxiety and uncertainty and the restless energy of someone trying to think their way through a situation that was too large for thinking alone. This sleeplessness was quieter. The anxiety was still present, but it had changed in quality, settled from agitation into something more like focus. She lay in the dark and thought about what she was going to do. She thought about the pier and Ashford and Colby in the chair, and the plan that Stellan and Sal had laid out in the study with the maps and the positions and the 15 men. She thought about the signal, the left ear, the single deliberate touch that would bring everything into motion. She thought about all the things she had been asked to do in her life and all the things she had simply done without being asked, and the particular difference between those categories. She had not been asked to pick up the bottle in the alley. She had done it because a child was frightened and she was the person present and there was no one else. She had not been asked to turn down Ashford's offer or to walk his car directly to Stellan's desk. She had done those things because Nico had looked at her from a window seat with eyes that were older than his face and asked a question about real smiles and pretend ones, and she had understood in that moment that the answer to his question was going to require something from her. The question was never whether she would go to the pier. The question was what she was going to carry with her when she went. She lay in the dark and listened to the house, the footsteps in the corridor, that she now knew as well as she knew her own breathing, the specific pattern of a father who could not sleep because he was afraid. And she thought about what it meant to stay. Not to stay in the house, not to stay in the situation, but to stay in the way that Nico had meant it when he drew the 4 figures and wrote the words above them. To be someone who did not leave when leaving was the available option. To be someone whose presence accumulated rather than depleted. She had been that person for Ren her entire daughter's life. She had been that person for Colby imperfectly and with considerable frustration and without always knowing whether it was making any difference. She had been that person in a diner in South Brooklyn for 2 years and 3 months, showing up on time and smiling at men who did not say thank you and going home through an alley because it saved 15 minutes and her daughter was alone. She was that person. It was not a choice she had made in this house. It was something she had arrived with. The footsteps in their corridor passed her door and slowed. A pause, longer than the previous nights. Then Stellan's voice quiet through the door. "Are you awake?" "Yes." "A moment." "He said I wanted to say something before tomorrow." She sat up. He said still from the corridor. In 3 years, no one has come back from that question. The one Nico asks, about real smiles and pretend ones. He said it carefully, each word placed with the consideration of someone who had been composing the sentence for longer than the conversation. They either cannot answer or they answer wrong. He paused. "You told him you could not always tell in the moment, that you could only tell later looking back." She waited. He said, "That is the correct answer." He said it was something that was not quite emotion, but was the shape that emotion leaves behind when it has been very carefully managed. "I did not know there was a correct answer, but that is it." She did not speak. He said, "Come back tomorrow." She said, "I will." The footsteps continued down the corridor. She sat in the dark and breathed and felt the particular quality of that exchange. Something that had been offered and received without being named, which was sometimes the only way things of that size could be offered at all. Then she lay back down and closed her eyes, and this time she slept. In the epilogue of the 3 months, there were things that happened slowly and without announcement. Nico began for the first time to talk about his mother in the past tense. Not frequently, not with any visible agenda, but occasionally in the middle of other conversations, he would reference something Helena had done or said with the grammar of a person who had separated the event from the wound, who had placed the thing in its correct temporal location and was learning to leave it there. Stellan heard these references and did not redirect them or visibly react to them. He simply absorbed them the way he absorbed most things, with the steady, unreactive attention that Nora had come to understand as his specific form of care. Ren, for her part, asked once why Nico's mama did not live with them. Nico said, "She lives somewhere else now." Ren said, "Does she visit?" Nico said, "Not yet." Ren considered this with the pragmatic acceptance of a 7-year-old for whom the world contained many arrangements that were not ideal but were functional. She said, "Okay." Then she asked if they could have cereal for breakfast, and the subject was closed. Nora watched this exchange from across the kitchen table and filed it away in the category of things that confirmed her assessment, which was that these 2 children had found in each other something that was genuinely useful and genuinely good and did not need to be managed or explained. Colby, at his 11th week in the warehouse, stayed late without being asked to help with an inventory discrepancy that was not his responsibility but was adjacent to his area. The shift manager, for instance, noted this without comment, which was the highest form of recognition available from that particular source. When Colby mentioned it to Nora on Sunday, he mentioned it as a fact rather than a boast, which was a distinction that told her everything she needed to know about where he was. She said Dad would have liked hearing that. Colby looked at her from across the Sunday table with an expression that was complicated and simple, simultaneously, the particular combination that lives in the space between grief and gratitude. He said, yeah, he would have. They sat with it for a moment in the way that siblings can sit with things, the shared interior of a history that did not require words to be present. Then Ren asked Colby to explain the basketball move again, and the moment passed, and the table was full again, and the house held them all in its quiet, careful way. There was an evening in early February, a Tuesday, when Stellan came to find Nora in the sitting room where she had been going over the logistics documents he had asked her to review. She had begun helping with the legitimate operations in a way that had not been formally proposed and had not been formally agreed to, but had simply emerged from the fact that she had a mind that organized information efficiently, and the information was present and needed organizing. He sat across from her. He said, I want to tell you something about what I am trying to become. She put down the papers. He said, I have spent 20 years building something that required me to be a particular kind of person. He said it without apology and without the performance of shame that would have been less honest. That person has kept my son safe. That person has kept the people who work for me alive. That person has also done things that I would not want documented. She waited. He said, I am not that person in every room now. I have not been for some time. There are rooms I have been exiting, gradually to arrangements. I have been unwinding structures. I have been transferring to people who have less complicated relationships with them than I do. She said, Sal knows. He said Sal has been the architect of most of it. He said it with a small acknowledgement in his voice, something that was close to warmth in the direction of a person he had worked beside for a long time. He is better at the unwinding than I am. I am better at the building. She said, why are you telling me this? He said, because you should know where things are going, not just where they are. He held her eyes. And because I am tired of being a person who only explains himself to Sal. She looked at him. He said, that is not something I have said before. She said, I know. He said, how do you know? She said, because you said it like it cost you something. He was quiet for a moment. Then something moved in his expression, not quite a smile, but the structural possibility of one, the arrangement of the features into a position that suggested the capacity. She picked up the documents. He said, you can ask questions, if you have them, about what is being unwound and what is being built. She said, I will, when I have them. He stood to leave. She said, Stellan. He turned. She said, the rooms you are exiting. Make sure Nico knows, not the details, just the direction. He was quiet. She said, he draws you alone inside a circle. He has been drawing that for a long time. Let the drawing change. He stood in the doorway for a moment with the particular stillness of someone absorbing something that has landed in exactly the right place. He said yes. Then he left. She sat with the logistics documents in her lap and the winter light through the window and the sounds of the house around her, and felt the particular quality of a life that was not finished, becoming itself not complete, but in motion, not resolved, but moving in a direction that felt for the first time in a long time like hers. The meeting with Ashford happened the following morning. She did not plan it. She was returning from a walk she had been allowed because the perimeter was guarded, and Sal had grudgingly acknowledged that keeping her entirely confined would eventually produce more problems than it solved. She was half a block from the estate gate when the navy blue SUV came around the corner at a speed that suggested it had been waiting. The door opened before she could step back. The man who held it was polite in the way that bodyguards are polite, which is to say impeccably mannered and entirely indifferent to consent. He said Mr. Ashford would like a word, Miss Callahan. He said it like an invitation to a reasonable and pleasant event. She got in because the alternative involved a scene she was not equipped to win. Gerald Ashford was 62 years old and had the appearance of a man who had spent his entire life in rooms where the furniture was chosen to communicate wealth without appearing to try. He wore a suit that belonged in a different century patrician and understated and worth more than her car. He had silver hair, good posture, and the eyes of someone who had not been surprised by anything in a very long time. He was sitting at a private table in a restaurant that was closed to anyone else, a glass of red wine beside him. Untouched food arranged before him with the neatness of a man who had ordered it for atmosphere rather than appetite. Miss Callahan, he gestured to the chair across from him. Please sit. She sat. He studied her for a moment with the patient assessment of someone who collects information the way other people collect art for its own sake, for the pleasure of knowing. "I have heard a great deal about you," he said. "The woman with the beer bottle," he smiled. "There is something almost classical about it. The ordinary person doing the extraordinary thing out of nothing but instinct. Say what you need to say." He reached for his wine. "Direct. I appreciate that." He set the glass down. "I want to be clear about something before we discuss anything else. I am not your enemy, Miss Callahan. I am a businessman who has a problem, and you are, through no fault of your own, positioned at the center of it." He opened a folder on the table and turned it toward her. The first page was a bank statement. Her name, her account, the number she had been looking at for months with the particular anxiety of someone watching a countdown. Below it, the eviction notice. Wren's medical bills from the previous winter, the pneumonia that had taken 3 weeks and left a debt that was still accumulating interest. School fees, utility arrears, a column of numbers that told the precise story of a woman spending more than she earned and knowing it and having no way to change it. She did not look away. She had not been ashamed of her situation before he showed it to her, and she was not ashamed of it now. He turned to the second section of the folder, a bank account with her name on it. The balance had 6 figures. A property deed for a house in Queens, 2 bedrooms, a yard, a neighborhood where Wren could walk to school without Nora lying awake calculating the route. A document that appeared to be a college savings account established in Wren's name, already funded with a number that would cover 4 years at a state school with money left over. "All you have to do," Gerald Ashford said, "is tell me one thing when Stellan leaves the estate, one night, one window, a schedule. He will never know it came from you." He folded his hands on the table with the ease of someone who had made offers like this before and been accepted before. "Your daughter gets a house, she gets a future. Your brother's debt stays buried. You go back to your life, but a version of your life that is not a constant emergency." Nora looked at the folder. She looked at Wren's name on the college document, at the figure next to it, at the house that had a yard in it, at the account balance. That would mean she never had to choose between the electricity bill and the school trip again. She looked at all of it, and she thought about Nico and his sketchbook, and his question about real smiles and pretend ones. And she thought about a 9-year-old boy asking her not to leave the way his mother left. And she thought about what would happen to that boy if she answered yes to this question. "I need time," she said. "Of course." Ashford closed the folder. He was satisfied in a way that made her want to leave the room immediately. "I am a patient man, Miss Callahan, within reason. A card, a number, a car back to within a block of the gate." She walked the last block alone, and when she was through the gate, she kept walking past the guard who nodded at her, past the garden where she could hear Nico and Wren somewhere out of sight, into the house, and directly to the study. She placed Ashford's card on Stellan's desk. He looked at it. "He met with me," she said, "outside the gate this morning." She told him everything: the folder, the offer, the number, the house in Queens. She told him quickly and without editorializing because the facts were sufficient. Stellan did not pick up the card. He looked at it for a long moment, then at her. "You came directly here." "Yes." "You did not call the number." "Number." "Why not?" She looked directly at him. "Because your son asked me not to leave like his mother left. And I do not make promises to children that I do not intend to keep." Stellan picked up the card between 2 fingers, held it for a moment, and then lit it with a lighter from his desk drawer and set it in the ashtray and watched it burn to the edge and passed it. He did not say thank you. What passed instead was something more functional, a recalibration, the quiet acknowledgement of new information settling into its correct position. Then his phone buzzed. He looked at the screen and stood. "Your landlord," he said. "A man named Brewster." She frowned. "What about him?" "He called the house number 20 minutes ago." Sal took the message. He turned the phone screen toward her. The message read, "Rent increase effective immediately, double the current rate. Cash only due by Friday or vacate." Nora stared at it. "Ashford," she said. "He is squeezing your life from the outside." Stellan set the phone down. "He wants you feeling the pressure from both directions. Trapped inside here, collapsing out there. He expects desperation to do the work that persuasion could not." She looked at him. "Consider the rent addressed," he said. "Your building has been purchased as of this morning. You owe nothing going forward." He said it with no ceremony at all. "The practical delivery of a practical decision. Wren's school fees are covered through the end of the year. Your debts are cleared. In exchange for what?" He met her eyes. "Your honesty. Nothing else. From this point forward, nothing hidden between us." She studied him. That is a significant thing to offer someone you are still verifying. Yes, he said simply. It is. She nodded once and left him standing in the study with the ash of Ashford's card in the tray and the phone face down on the desk. Sal was waiting in the hallway. She did not know how much he had heard. She suspected all of it. He looked at her without the layer she had become accustomed to, without the surveillance face or the skeptical face or the protective face. Just a man taking a new measurement. She walked past him toward the sound of the children. The video came 2 mornings later. It arrived as a file transmitted to Sal's device via a channel that, as Sal put it with flat precision, should not have been accessible, which meant it had been sent by someone who knew their protocols, someone who had been inside the house, someone who had sat in that sitting room and waited while Stellan finished a call. They watched it in the study, all three of them and two of Stellan's men who had been called in. Colby was in a chair. His hands were behind him. His left eye was swollen to a slit, and there was blood dried at the corner of his mouth, dark against his pale skin. He was trying to hold himself steady and mostly managing it, and the effort was visible in his throat, in the swallowing, in the way he breathed with deliberate control, as though he had decided that breathing carefully was the only thing he could govern right now. Ashford stood behind him. He was dressed as he had been in the restaurant. Same suit, same posture. The composed aesthetics of a man who saw no reason to alter his presentation because the setting had changed. He looked into the camera and said, "Nora, I have been patient because patience is a quality I genuinely possess. But I am beginning to think that patience is being mistaken for hesitation." He rested a hand on Colby's shoulder. "Your brother came to me of his own accord." He said it with what appeared to be genuine warmth. That quality runs in families, apparently. He leaned down slightly closer to the camera. "Tonight, midnight, Pier 22 in Red Hook. You come alone, no phone, no wire, no arrangements made on your behalf. You come as yourself and we have a final conversation about what you can provide me with and what I can provide you in return." He straightened. "If you do not come," he said pleasantly, "your brother will have a very long night. And tomorrow morning when the school on Whitmore Street opens and the children arrive for first period and third period comes and the children go out for recess, I will demonstrate in a very specific way how little I regard the limits that other people assume protect them." He reached into his jacket and produced a handgun. He checked it with the casual efficiency of someone for whom this was unremarkable, then pressed it against the side of Colby's head. Colby went perfectly still. His eyes closed and then stayed closed, which was worse somehow than if he had squeezed them shut. Ashford pulled the trigger. The chamber was empty. The click was enormous in the room's silence. Colby made a sound that Nora felt in her chest like a struck chord. "Next time it will not be," Ashford said. "Midnight. Come alone." The file ended. Nobody in the room spoke for a moment. One of the men near the door said something under his breath. Sal turned away from the screen and pressed his palms flat on the desk and breathed once, controlled and precise. Stellan stood without moving, looking at the frozen final frame at Colby in the chair, with his eyes still closed and his whole body organized around the effort of not coming apart. Something was working behind Stellan's face that was not the controlled absence she had grown used to. Something real and hot that he was containing with effort. "He wants you," Stellan said, "and through you access to Nico. He will use the threat of your brother to move you and use the threat of your daughter to hold you in place." He said it as analysis, not speculation. "What he does not know," Nora said, "is that I am not going to stand still long enough to be held." Both men looked at her. She had been thinking since the video started. She had been thinking while Ashford spoke in that pleasant voice, and while the gun clicked, and while Colby made that sound. She had been doing the thing she did when the situation exceeded her resources, which was to assess what she actually had rather than what she wished she had. She had herself. She had the fact that Ashford had underestimated her in the restaurant, watching her look at the folder with an expression of calculation that he had mistaken for consideration. He had expected her to be a woman in distress making a difficult choice. He had not adjusted that assessment. "I will go to the pier," she said. Sal said absolutely not. She looked at Stellan. "He expects me to either refuse and give him cause to act or arrive and comply." She kept her voice level. "What he is not expecting is for me to arrive with nothing to give him, while everything he cannot see is already in position around him." "You are describing using yourself as the point of exposure," Sal said. "That is not strategy. That is sacrifice. It is the distraction that makes the strategy possible," she said. He sees a frightened woman trying to save her brother. He has seen that version of me twice now, and each time it satisfied him. He is not going to reassess it tonight because there is no reason to. She looked at Stellan. I will go in as myself. I will ask to see Colby standing and closed before I say anything. I will keep Ashford talking. The moment Colby is within reach, I signal. Stellan was quiet for a long time. What is the signal? Sal said. His voice had changed. It had not become warm, but the active opposition had drained out of it, replaced by something that was at least operational. I touched my left ear, she said, once. Stellan looked at Sal. 15 men. He said it the way he said things that were decided. Snipers at the northeast and southwest corners of the pier roof. 4 at ground level 2, each at the loading dock access and the water gate. The rest on the perimeter in vehicles. No visible presence until she signals. He looked back at Nora. You do not give him anything. You stall. The moment Colby is within reach, you signal. He held her eyes. And if something changes before you can signal, we go in regardless. That is not negotiable. She nodded. Sal left the room to begin the arrangements. Stellan remained. When the door closed, he moved to the window, not standing, with the composed authority she had seen in him in this same position before, but with something quieter, the posture of a man who was thinking about something he did not know how to think about. Helena left on a Tuesday, he said. It rained. Nico was at school. She packed one bag and called a car, and she was gone before I came home. He said it without particular inflection. As a fact, not a wound, or at least presented that way. I came home, and there was a note on the kitchen counter, and Nico's dinner was already made covered with a plate because she had thought about dinner before she left. He turned from the window. I told myself she left because of what I am, because of this life, this world, the things that come with it. He looked at her. It was easier to believe that than to believe she chose to go, that the leaving was active, not reactive. Nora said, did it matter? Either way, she was gone. He was quiet for a moment. Yes and no, he said. If she left because of what I am, then nothing could have changed it. If she chose to go, then perhaps something could have. He looked at the floor briefly. Nico believed she left because of him, that he was too much, too demanding, too present. Children construct those narratives. They always assign the cause to themselves. I know, Nora said. He looked at her. I know because Ren did it too, she said. When her father left, she was 4 years old and she decided it was because she cried too much at night. She carried that for a year before she told me. How did you fix it? You cannot fix it, she said. You can just stay close enough so he does not have to carry it alone. She looked directly at him. That is all you can do. You stay, you show up, you do not leave, and eventually the story he built loses some of its power because the evidence against it keeps accumulating. Stellan looked at her for a long time. Long enough that the silence shifted into something that was not comfortable exactly, but was honest, which was in some ways more valuable. Then he said, come back from that pier. She said, I will. She meant it the same way she had meant everything she had said to Nico, with the full weight of intention, which was the only currency she had that actually cost her something. She chose her clothes for the pier carefully, not for any effect on Ashford, but because she wanted to feel like herself, her own jeans, her own jacket, her own boots. Not the mansion, not the borrowed things, not the world she had been inhabiting for the past days. Herself, Nora Callahan from South Brooklyn, who had $347 and a hole in her left shoe and had picked up a bottle in a dark alley and decided that was enough to work with. What she did not know as the cars left the estate in coordinated silence was that Nico had seen the preparations from his window. He had watched the men move with their particular deliberate efficiency, watched the vehicles being positioned, watched the specific choreography of something being planned. He was 9 years old and had grown up in this house, and he understood what preparation for an operation looked like. He also understood, in the way that children understand things that adults have tried to keep from them, that Nora was going somewhere that required that kind of preparation and that she was going because of him. He had slipped into the back of one of the secondary vehicles before anyone thought to account for him. Ren was asleep. The bodyguard assigned to his room had stepped into the hallway. Nico had moved quietly and with the practiced stealth of a child who had learned to navigate a house full of serious adults. Nobody knew he was there. Pier 22 in Red Hook was the kind of place that cities accumulate when industry retreats a stretch of old commercial waterfront that had outlived its purpose and not yet found a new one. Weathered planking, corroded metal railings, The smell of salt and diesel and the particular cold that comes off water in November, deeper and more insistent than the cold that comes off land. Nora arrived at 11:55. Ashford's men were visible at the edges of the pier's reach, four that she could count, and probably more she could not. The navy blue SUV sat at the entrance. The single overhead light at the pier's midpoint threw a cone of yellow onto the weathered planking. Ashford stood in it. He was dressed as he always seemed to be. The suit, the posture, the composed presentation of a man for whom control was not something he achieved, but something he simply inhabited. Miss Callahan, right on time. She walked toward him at a pace that said she had chosen to come rather than been compelled. When she was 20 feet from him, she stopped. I want to see my brother first. Standing in the light before I say anything. Ashford considered this. It was the hesitation of a man assessing whether the demand cost him anything meaningful. He decided it did not. He made a small gesture to his right, and two men appeared from the edge of the darkness with Colby between them. He was on his feet. That was the first thing she checked. His hands were free, which told her he had been assessed as too exhausted to run, which meant he had been awake too long and hurt more than the video had shown. His left eye was worse in person. He moved with the careful slowness of someone navigating pain they have decided not to announce. He saw her, and his face broke open in a way she had not seen in years. Not since he was 17 and she had found him after the car accident, the pure relief of someone who has been frightened long enough that the sight of safety produces grief before gratitude. Nora. She made herself not move toward him, not yet. She made herself look at Ashford instead. He is alive, Ashford said pleasantly. He gestured to the space beside him. Now, come and let us have the conversation we should have had 3 days ago. She walked forward, each step deliberate. He began to speak. The same practiced delivery, the same reasonable framing, the same patient architecture of his offer rebuilt from the ground up, as if the folder in the restaurant had been a first draft. She listened without listening, tracking the positions of his men, tracking Colby's location, tracking the invisible geometry of what Stellan had positioned in the darkness beyond the light. She said, "What exactly happens to Stellan Vare if I give you what you want?" He paused, smiled. "I imagine he makes adjustments, retreats from certain positions. Men like Stellan are survivors above all else. He will endure." She said, "And Nico." He said, "The boy is not relevant to my interests." She said, "He is relevant to mine." The first edge appeared in Ashford's composure. Not anger, just the thinning that happens when patience begins to convert into something with less yield in it. She had been watching Colby. The two men flanking him had loosened their attention, pulled to the conversation, their posture shifting from active restraint to something closer to observation. Colby was watching her with the focused attention of someone trying to read a signal he had not been given the code for. She looked at him directly. She said, "Colby, I forgive you." He went still. She let it be what it was, not strategy, not preamble, just the truth. The thing she had known since she understood why he had called Ashford and what he had been trying to do when he offered himself up. He had been trying to protect her. It had been wrong and it had been impulsive, and it had been exactly the kind of decision that Colby Callahan made when he loved someone and panicked simultaneously. And it was still something that came from love, and she forgave it, and she meant the forgiveness all the way through. She said, "Cover your ears." She touched her left ear. The pier erupted. The lights came from 3 directions, blinding and absolute, the kind that eliminate shadow entirely and leave no ambiguity about who is where. Then the sound of vehicles, the screech of tires on concrete at both ends of the pier, access road doors opening in sequence, feet on the planking from multiple angles simultaneously. Ashford's men wheeled toward the perimeter and found it already occupied. She ran toward Colby. The two men flanking him had stepped back in reflex, turning toward the noise and the light, and she covered the distance and grabbed her brother's arm and pulled. He moved. He was slower than she needed him to be, but he moved. She was 4 feet from the far edge of the light when she heard a voice she recognized and should not have heard here, and would have given everything she owned not to hear here. "Miss Nora." She looked up. Nico was running toward her from the direction of one of Stellan's vehicles, having come from somewhere he absolutely should not have been, having traveled the distance between a car and the pier, planking in the window of confusion when everyone was moving and nobody was counting children. He was running toward her with the specific terror of a child who has seen something he cannot process and has chosen the only person he trusts to run toward. Ashford saw him. She watched the calculation happen, watched him track from Nora to Nico, watched him understand that the child represented a higher order of leverage than anything he had been negotiating for. The boy who had already been taken once. The boy whose safety was the one thing that overrode every other calculation Stellenver made. The gun moved. She did not decide. She was between them before she understood. She had moved on her feet and turning, catching Nico with her left arm and pulling him into her body and presenting her back to the gun, because her back was not Nico, and that was the only math that mattered. She felt the impact before she heard the shot. The shoulder, the left side of the right shoulder, the force of it, spinning her clockwise and sending her down onto one knee on the weathered planking. The pain arrived a half-second behind bright and specific and significant, the kind that announces itself as something that will require attention. She held Nico. She could feel his heart against her chest, rapid and small and absolutely present. She could feel his arms around her with the grip of a child who has decided not to let go and means it entirely. She breathed through the pain because Nico was against her and she was not going to let him feel her go down. 3 shots came from the elevated position Stellan had placed. Clean, precise, professional. Gerald Ashford's body hit the pier planking behind her. She heard it without turning to look. She held the boy and she breathed, and she felt the cold of the pier through her jeans, and the cold of the November water on the air, and the warmth of a 9-year-old's arms around her, and she held all of it. Stellan reached her in seconds. She heard him before she saw him, his footsteps on the planking, distinct from the others, and then his hands were on them both, one on Nico's back, one on her arm, and she felt him take the weight of his son from her, with the careful ferocity of someone lifting the thing they cannot afford to lose. Nico looked at his father and then looked back at Nora. "You stayed," he said. He said it with the wonder of someone confirming something they had believed but had not been certain of. "You said you would not leave, and you stayed." She could not speak for a moment. Then she said, "I told you I would." Sal was there with a jacket pressed against her shoulder. Pressure applied with the firmness of someone who understood wound management, his expression stripped of everything she had previously associated with him. Just practical care delivered without commentary. Then Colby was beside her. She had not noticed him coming, but he was there, his hand finding her left hand, holding it the way he had not held anything of hers since they were children, and their father was still alive, and the world had been a size that made sense. He did not say anything, he just held on. She let him. She woke in a room that smelled like antiseptic and clean linen. The ceiling was familiar. She placed it after a moment, one of the upper floor rooms in the mansion, rearranged into something clinical with the speed and thoroughness that characterized how this house handled crises. There was an IV line in her left arm. Her right shoulder was bandaged comprehensively and ached with the deep grinding ache of tissue that has been aggressively repaired and is registering its objection. She turned her head. Nico and Ren were asleep together in the large chair by the window, her daughter's head on Nico's shoulder. Both of them surrendered entirely to sleep in the way that only children can manage. Ren was clutching the stuffed bear she went everywhere with. Nico had his sketchbook in his lap, closed his hand resting on the cover, as though even in sleep he wanted to know it was there. Stellan was in the chair beside her bed. He was not asleep. He was sitting with the quality of someone who had been sitting for a long time and had stopped tracking how long. When she turned her head, he was already looking at her. She said, "Nico." "He is fine," Stellan said. "He was never in any danger once you placed yourself between him and Ashford. My men had a clear line, 4 seconds. She said, "How long?" 18 hours. The bullet was clean through. No structural damage. He said it with the flatness she had learned to read as containment rather than absence. "You will have a significant scar and 6 weeks of limited mobility." She almost smiled. "That is very specific. You are not a good patient." He said it with certainty. "I have already determined this." They sat in the quiet of the room, the sound of the children breathing the house around them in its nighttime mode. She said, "Vivian." "Sal has her." He paused. "She has been transferred to federal custody with documentation sufficient to occupy her for a considerable time. The listening device, the disabled alarm, the 8 months of information she provided Ashford." He said it without heat, which told her it had cost him something to say it that way. "Everything she gave him is now in the hands of people who will use it to dismantle what he built." Sal ensured the transfer personally. She felt the justice of this settle, not satisfaction exactly, but completion. She said, "What happens now?" He looked at her for a long time. Then he said, "Ashford's operation collapses without him. The men he had positioned will spend the coming months understanding who holds those positions now. He said it with a matter-of-factness that did not invite interrogation. It will not be simple, but it will be resolved. She said, that is still not what I was asking. He was quiet. She looked at the ceiling. She was aware of the IV in the shoulder and the specific weight of an exhaustion that was larger than one night accumulated over years of being the person who managed everything alone. He said, your debts are cleared. Your building is yours at no cost. Ren's school is covered. He said it without ceremony as simple information. Colby has work if he wants it. Legitimate in the logistics company, beginning at the level he has earned, which is the beginning, but with genuine possibility from there. She looked at him. He met her eyes. He said, I am doing this because you took a bullet for my son, but also because you sat with him at 2 a.m. and told him the truth about real smiles and pretend ones. Because you did not take Ashford's offer when taking it was the reasonable thing to do. Because you came to me with the card instead of using it. He paused. Because in my experience, people who do not run are worth keeping close, and you have not run once. She was quiet. He said, you asked what happens now. She said, I did. He looked at his son asleep in the chair, at the sketchbook on Nico's lap, at Ren pressed against the boy's shoulder with total unconscious trust. He said this. He said it simply without performance. This is what happens now, if you will have it. She did not answer immediately because the answer was significant and she intended to mean it all the way through. She said, I am already here. 3 months later, the pier was a memory that lived in the shoulder on cold mornings and nowhere else. The mansion in November had been a foreign place, immense and controlled and organized around the absence of things. The mansion in February was different, not in its structure, but in what lived inside it, which had changed in the ways that matter, which are always the ways you cannot point to directly, but can only observe as accumulation. Ren had a drawer in Nico's room for the things she left behind during sleepovers, which had become a standard feature of the week. Nico had developed a detailed and somewhat rigid opinion about breakfast that he expressed with increasing confidence, and Stellan listened to it each morning with the expression Nora had come to understand as his version of happiness, not effusive, not performed, just real and consistent and present. Colby worked in the warehouse on the west side of Staten Island, the logistics arm that moved legal cargo. He had been there for 11 weeks. He had been late twice. He had been spoken to once by the shift manager, a man named Ference, who had no patience for imprecision, and Colby had not complained about any of this to Nora, which was the most significant development of the 3 months combined. He came to the mansion for dinner on Sunday evenings. He had started bringing things, small things, a book Nico had mentioned, a pastry for Ren, once a 6-pack of the specific soda Nora had liked as a teenager that she had not thought about in years. He did not announce these things. He just brought them and put them down, and that was that. Sal came to the kitchen one Tuesday morning while the children were in their schoolroom. He was holding a coffee cup, and he was not looking at Nora, which was unusual. He said, I owe you a statement of record. She waited. He said, from the moment you arrived in this house, I argued against your presence. I argued that you were a liability and a risk and a vulnerability in a structure that could not afford vulnerabilities. He was still not looking at her. I was not wrong about the risk. You were all of those things, but I was wrong about the liability. He set his coffee cup down. You held, he said. He finally looked at her. I did not expect you to hold. I was measuring you by what most people do when they are offered everything they need. That was not accurate measurement. She said, is this an apology? He said, I do not apologize. He stood. It is a correction to the record. He picked up his cup. The record should be accurate. He left. She sat with her coffee. Outside the window, Nico and Ren had escaped the schoolroom early and were in the yard, Nico explaining something to Ren with the serious authority he brought to subjects he had decided mattered. Ren listening with the focused skepticism she brought to everything, and then nodding once when she had made her own determination about whether he was right. Colby had arrived for an early visit and was attempting to teach Nico a basketball move that he himself could not execute reliably, which was not stopping him from attempting it with increasing enthusiasm. He dropped the ball for the 3rd time, and Nico bent without comment and picked it up and handed it back, patient in the way that surprised Nora each time she saw it, patient in the way that children are sometimes patient with the adults they have decided to take seriously. Stellan appeared in the kitchen doorway. He stood there watching the same scene through the window. She watched him watch it. She saw the jaw, the steadiness in him that was different now from the controlled absence it had been at the beginning. The door she had first seen in the alley was open more often now. Not all the way, probably never all the way, but open enough that she could see the light behind it. He said, "You asked me once what I wanted from you." She said, "You never answered." He said, "I am answering now." He turned from the window to look at her. "Stay. Not because of what you did in that alley or on that pier, not because of what it cost you, because of who you are when there is nothing at stake, because of who you are at this table at 7 in the morning." He held her gaze. "Because my son drew you into his family before I understood why, and I understand why now." Outside the window, Colby finally executed the basketball move correctly, purely by accident, and threw his arms up and turned to Nico, who shook his head slowly in the manner of a coach, who has waited a long time for this moment and intends to receive it with dignity. Ren said something that made both of them laugh. Colby turned toward the window and saw Nora watching. He did not wave. He did not perform anything. He just looked at her for a moment with an expression that said what he had never been able to say in the right sequence of words. The gratitude and the regret and the love and the resolve, all present simultaneously. And then he turned back to the game. She stood up. She opened the back door and went out into the February morning, and the cold and the sound of her daughter's laughter, and the bare trees and the particular quality of winter light that suggests the possibility of spring without promising it, and behind her she heard Stellan follow, and the door closed behind them on the warmth inside, and the yard held all of them, and it was sufficient. That night, after the house had settled into the sounds it made, when the people in it had stopped requiring it to be anything other than shelter, Nico opened his sketchbook to the last page. The drawing was one he had made months ago before the pier, before the bullet, before the February morning in the yard, and the Tuesday with Sal in the kitchen, and the Sunday evenings with Colby, and all the accumulation of ordinary things that had become, without announcement, a life. 4 figures standing before a house. A man, a boy, a woman with kind eyes, a smaller figure holding her hand. Above them, the words he had written then, in the careful handwriting of a 9-year-old, who had learned to be precise with things that mattered: my new family. Please don't leave like Mama did. Below them in ink that was newer that he had added tonight with deliberate care, taking his time with each letter. They stayed. He closed the book. He turned off the light. Outside the window, the city continued its endless work, and the house held quiet and still and full. And for the first time in 3 years, Nico Vare fell asleep without listening for footsteps in the hall. And outside, the winter held the city in its quiet grip, patient as it always is. And somewhere in Brooklyn, a diner opened its doors to the morning.